Hey, good deal. If you have your phone or a pen and paper, I'm going to challenge you to take some notes today, because what we're going to look at really applies to our educators, it applies to our leaders, it applies to us as parents, it applies to us in business, in every aspect of life. It applies to us. And so while you're getting your pen out to take some notes, this is kind of a standalone message, and we're calling it Embrace Your Place. To embrace the place that you're in and the position that you're in for the time that you're in it. And it's strategic when you look at where you sit down to be in that place for that season. And so while we're looking at that together this morning, I saw a wasp fly across my face a few minutes ago. I don't know if any of you saw it, but I did. And so don't think I'm going all Pentecostal if you see my hands start doing all this. I mean, we don't need no YouTube videos, so please keep your phones down. but I saw one a minute ago fly by, and I'm like, oh, where did he come from? I'm going to keep an eye on him. But squirrel. All right, so I want to give you some scripture to be able to look at this morning, and then I'm going to give you 3 simple points that I think will be very easy for you to be reminded of them as you leave here today. I always try to do that, to have a main point for us to be able to look at. So Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 through 5, I'm going to dig right in because I want to be sure to get through this. Thankfully, we started at 10, so we'll be done by 12:30 and we'll get out of here. Matthew 28, some of you are like, is he serious? 1 through 5. After the Sabbath, at the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake. We all know this scripture, right? And the angel of the Lord came down from heaven, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone, and what? Sat on it. His appearance was like lightning. His clothes were like white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him, they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, but he is risen. Just as he said, come and see the place where he lay." So that's the foundation of who we are as Christ followers, that the fact that Jesus was resurrected from the dead. That's where our hope is found, that he's not still dead, but he's alive, and he overcome the grave. We sing about that power even this morning. But 3 words I want us to look at. Verse 2 there, back to verse 2. There's a violent earthquake. The angel of the Lord came down from heaven, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone, and did what? He sat on it. That's what I want us to look at for just a few minutes. He sat on it. So we have to be willing to embrace the place. We have to choose where we're gonna sit. Without saying any words, the angel was teaching us something. He could have stood, but yet he chose to sit on the stone that he rolled away. Not just sit anywhere, but a specific place. Perhaps a strategic place of where he sat down. And so my question is this: how do you choose where you sit? Now this is where it gets really interesting, because some of us in here are really quirky. I know I am. I was having this conversation with some of the guys, and we were all laughing about how quirky we are. But how many of you, when you go in a restaurant, there's certain places you want to sit? Raise your hand. All right, so I'm not the only one, right? So for me, anywhere we sit, I always want to have my back to the wall where I can see everything that's going around. Is there any other control freaks like that besides me? Okay, some of you are in here. I heard another one this morning. It's not only that, but so like, I don't want to sit near the restroom because people are coming in and out, moving. How many of you say, I don't want to sit by the restrooms, right? Some of you raise your hand. So we have a specific place we want to sit when we go in a restaurant. How about in the movies? How many of you like to sit on the very back row in the movies? Raise your hand, because you don't want anybody sitting behind you. See, this is where I struggle, because I don't want anybody to sit behind me, but I just paid for this movie, so I'm getting close enough to be able to enjoy it, right? Now, how many of you are those that like to sit on like the first 10 rows? Raise your hand. I know there's some out there. Like, I don't know how you do that. Either I'm going to throw up from motion sickness, or I'm going to have to go to a chiropractor because my head's like this the whole time. But there's people that enjoy sitting there. How many of you are like, I want to get in the middle? That's where I'm at. Let me ask you another one. How many of you are those that want to sit on the aisle? I always got to be an aisle guy or woman. Aisles, right? They're like, I got to sit on the aisle so I can get in and out. I know when I get on a plane, I'll go in and normally check. I want to sit by the window near the wing. And so when I come in, I always look at my ticket, and then somebody will end up be sitting in your seat, and you're like, do I say something, or do I just sit beside them? Like, how do I approach this? Because we're on the same road. Do I just let them have it? And so it's always strategic in how we choose where we're going to sit down, and whether it's close to the exit. It's always interesting, right? If it's a band or if it's something we love, man, we're getting front row. If it's a guest speaker for the day and we have no idea, I'm getting near the exit, right? I want to make an exit if they go too long. So we all have our quirks and how we choose where we're going to sit. But my thing is this: the place you choose matters more than you realize. Because it's not only you physically sitting there, but you're putting your soul there. So it matters more than just physically where you choose to sit, but it's a place spiritually. It's where your soul is. And we have to guard that. The angel rolled back the stone, and what did he do? He sat on it. I think it was very significant and even symbolic. And we'll get to that in just a moment, but there's two variables when you sit down. One is the reason you're sitting down, and the other variable is the place that you sit down. One is why do I want to sit, and the other is where am I going to sit. Another example of this is 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 3 through 4 in the NIV. It says, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life, and when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and he came to what? What is that? A broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might what? Die. Why? Because he had fear, he had anxiety, he perhaps was tired. But the place he chose to sit was under this bush. It was a tree, actually. And there's a couple of things you need to know about a broom bush. 3 things I'll give you. Number 1 is this: it grows in the desert, meaning it's a very dry place. He chose to sit in a place that was very dry when he ran away. Number 2 is not only that, but it had a bitter root that poor people were accustomed to eating. In fact, Job chapter 30, verses 3 through 4, they are gaunt from poverty and hunger. They claw the dry ground in desolate wastelands. Verse 4, they pluck wild greens from among the bushes and eat from the roots of what? Broom trees. So it's a place of poverty. It's a place of dryness. And then not only that, but the twigs on a broom bush would often be used for binding, to hold something, to bind it down. So he chose to sit in a place that would be dry, bitter, in poverty, and not only that, but be bound. And so Elijah had gone to a place that he shouldn't have gone. He went to a source that he should not have gone to, and he was bound by it in the place that he went. So it's very significant in understanding that it's important where we choose to sit. We have to guard and embrace the place that we are, but we have to be wise about where we sit down, because it's not only physically we sit down, but it's our soul that sits there in that place for that season. So let's compare for just a moment with this. Back 1 Kings chapter 19, the second part of verse 4 says, he came to the broom bush, and what did he do? Say that with me. He came to the broom bush, and what did he do? He sat down what? Under it. And pray that he what? Might die. Look at Matthew 28, verse 2 on the screen with me. The other part we looked at. There was a violent earthquake, for the angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone, and what did he do? Sat on it. There's a difference in sitting on it and sitting under it. There's a difference between declaring victory over it and allowing it to have victory over you. But that's a choice that we make. We choose where our emotions are going to get seated, how we're going to respond to the things that happen to us physically, spiritually, emotionally, and all of those different things. The angel of the stone represented what the enemy tried to use to stop Jesus. The very thing that was trying to hold Jesus in was the thing that the angel sat on. And for us, the thing the devil's tried to stop you with can become the very thing that you sit on to declare the goodness of God over your life. But every one of us has to make a choice whether we're going to sit on it or we're going to sit under it. Am I going to allow this thing that in this season that I'm in to rule over me, or am I going to sit on top of it and declare victory and say, I'm going to make the best of this because Christ is in me and through me, and I can do all things through Christ? How am I going to respond to the position I'm in? And there's always the two responses. You can be under it or you can be on it. What's the enemy tried to stop you with? What stone has he tried to roll over in front of you? Maybe guilt, shame, past mistakes, failures, unforgiveness, a bad report, whatever it is. And you have to be able to come to a place where you say, I'm not going to sit under it. I'm going to sit on top of it. I'm going to declare victory in this because victory has a name, and that name is what? Jesus. I declare victory in this. And not only where you sit, not only is it just for you, but it's generational. It follows you. It follows your kids. It follows your family. It follows your students, educators. It follows those who come behind you, and I'll show you how. 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 30, the Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well and accomplished in what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab all I have in mind to do, your descendants will sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation. It affected where his great-grandchildren would sit as a result of where he chose to sit and what he chose to do. And because he was willing to sit on it, the descendants were able to have victory over it. Because if you sit on it, then those behind you won't have to sit under it. And so for us as parents, dads, if you'll sit on your temper, your kids won't have to sit under it. Moms, if you will sit on that anxiety or whatever it may be, if you'll be willing to sit on it, then your kids won't have to live through it and sit under it. Because what they sit under is what influences them for the next generation. We as parents have the primary responsibility of that, not the teachers. But then the educators and us as a church, we come in behind that to be a support system for that. But what we choose to sit on, what we choose will set up what our next generation will be under as those that follow us. And so it's important for us to choose wisely how we respond as a leader. If you're negative, then others are going to be negative too, because they're under your influence. They're under your leadership. And whatever you give is how they will respond. And so we have to be reminded of that. You can sit on it or you can sit under it. But the choice you make is going to determine not only for you, but it impacts your kids. It impacts the future. Hebrews 12, 1-3. Therefore, since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders, so that the sin that so easily entangles, we know sin is so easy to entangle us. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. How do we do that? By fixing our eyes on who? On Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. So we look to him through those times. We look to him as an example for us to choose where we sit. Allow him to model. He goes on in verse 3, consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose what? And lose heart. That you're able to make it through. So we look to him as the example. And so on your way home from work, when you're exhausted and worn out, you need to choose your seat wisely. Because when you walk in the door, everyone else will fall under that. Look to somebody beside you and say, choose your seat wisely. Choose your seat wisely. Not only that, but this is an interesting thing. I want to talk just a moment about the difficulty of saving seats. Now, I know some of you are probably going to judge me this morning when we're done when I tell you all of this, but I have a pet peeve thing. I have this thing. How many of you, it's probably one of the most things I despise. How many of you hate saving seats? Raise your hand. Anybody hate saving seats? I'm okay if it's 1 or 2 seats. But when it becomes a whole row, how many of you been there before? You get the look, right? And next thing you know, I've got the keys and I got my shoe over here, and I'm like, Braden, you sit here, skip one. No, Briggs, you sit here. I actually got my shoe halfway off, so. Shoe here, and no, I'm going to put my book here, and I put your jacket. No, I'll take my tie off, I'll sit. I'm trying to save 10 seats, right? And everybody walking by going, ain't nobody sitting. What you doing? We here early because we want these front seats, and you're saving them for somebody else. That I'm telling you, I'm like, man, I don't mind saving 2 or 3. But then when you're saving 10, it's difficult because everybody looks at you, and then you're like, am I going to be rude? Am I really going to tell them no? Like, the seats are taken. Sure they are. No, really, they're taken. Somebody's coming. Well, they're not here. How many of you hate doing that? Raise your hand with me. Okay, I'm not the only one. Don't judge me, because then you're like, I'm never going to ask the pastor to save me a seat when we go anywhere. We'll just sit somewhere else. No, it's fine, but it's just difficult. It's difficult to do that, to save those seats. Psychology calls this the seat of emotion. In fact, around 1954, they started studying this. And the seat of emotion is the point where you choose where your emotions are going to go. We have a choice in how we respond to things with our emotions. Well, that's just the way that I am. No, you have a choice. We have a choice in how we respond with our emotions. They begin to do some research how the brain houses the place of the seat of emotions. In fact, they came up with the fact that you have 3 different brains. Some of you are going, well, I know people that don't have one. How can they have 3? But it's true. It's true. 3 different brains within our brain. It's the way it's compartmentalized and the way it's developed. There's the survival brain, which is developed early on. It's our respiratory system, our heartbeat, reproduction, reflex, our instincts, most involuntary part of the brain. The way that it functions. Not only do we have that part of the brain, the survival, but then we have the logical brain. They say that the logical brain is not fully developed until you're in your mid-20s. It's where we begin to learn how to make logical decisions and make good decisions. And to be able to take things and process and weighing out alternatives and regulate an emotional impulse and how all of that's going to work. They say it doesn't fully develop until the mid-20s. And then the last part is the emotional brain, which is what they literally call the seat of emotions. Because you choose where you're going to sit down with your emotions, how are you going to respond. This is the part of your brain that chooses where your emotions are going to take a seat. And there's a constant fight within our brain. There's a constant fight within yourself as to who's going to take the seat of your emotion. Right? Isn't it good whenever you take what people are studying and it actually lines up with Scripture? Look at this verse. Philippians 4:6-7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. In other words, there's this constant battle going on, and we have to not be anxious about anything, but we have to give it to God, and we have to make those prayer requests known. And it's up to you. It's up to you who's going to take that seat. And so we have to come to a point where you have to tell fear, this seat's taken. You can't have it. That anxiety, hey, this seat is taken. You can't have it. Hey, this seat is already taken. There's no room for insecurity. There's no room for that. I'm not going to allow it to come in because the seat's taken. You can't have this seat. This seat is already declared taken, and I have control of this seat, and I'm going to sit on it and not under it. But you have to make a choice. So you have to make that decision of what you're going to do. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5 says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought, and we what? Make it obedient. You have to make it obedient. There's some thoughts that I have to make them obedient, otherwise they're going to fly in a different direction. In other words, my sinful nature can come out. I have to take those thoughts and say, God, I've got to make these obedient to you because they really want to go a different way, a different place. And so I have to choose that seat of emotion. What's going to be seated there? How's that going to work? The angel shows up to show us where our rightful seat is. And it's on top of those things that the enemy is trying to use to hold us back. It's sitting on top of those things. We choose where we sit down, where our mind is, where our heart is, where our emotions are, and all of that. Where you sit is significant. And then the last one is this. You have a seat. There is a reserved seat for you. Now, this is the greatest feeling ever. Anytime you have reservations for a seat, you get to walk right in past the long line. You go into the restaurant and everybody's waiting and they've just shown up and they're trying to sit down, but you called in hours ahead of time and you have that seat for those places that you can do that, and you walk right past the line, you walk right past all of that, and you don't have to sit there and earn it and wait on it. You get to walk right in and enjoy it. Or maybe in a concert, you go in and you have the reserved seat. Man, you don't have to wait in line and fight for those seats that are open for anybody. You have a seat that has your number, it's your name, it's for you. And you have a seat that's been reserved for you. And I don't know about you, but that's good when that's there. But we have to be reminded of that spiritually, that there's a seat that's been reserved just for me. There's a seat that's been reserved and saved just for you. And there's no greater feeling when someone has you a saved seat. They've done all the work. All you have to do is just come in. And that's exactly what Jesus Christ did for us, right? When he went to the cross, he paid a price. And he endured the pain in order that a seat could be open and reserved for you. You just have to accept it. The seat's reserved and it's there, but until you accept it and receive it and go in and sit in it, it's empty. And for many of us in here, you've received Christ as your Savior, and you've grabbed that reserved seat, and you've got that reservation. You've got that. You've made the declaration. You've sitting on it. You own that. It's who you are. But for many of us, perhaps we have the seat reserved, but we really haven't owned it. Maybe some of you've prayed and you say, I prayed and I've accepted Christ, but I really haven't taken ownership in it. I'm not sitting in it. I'm still talking about it. I'm still looking at it, but I'm not really sitting in it and living it. And it's time to embrace your place and sit in that seat. Choose wisely where you sit. And to sit in that place that's been reserved for you to be able to own. And then what you have to be willing to do is, all of us, we have to be willing to check our ticket. Anytime you go to a concert, or you get on an airplane or whatever, maybe you're constantly looking at the ticket, and you're looking up and looking at the ticket, and you're looking up and you're looking at the ticket, and you're looking up and you're like, okay, I'm here, 1, 2, 3. Is this J, or is this J, or do I need to go up? Is it on the floor? Is it in the seat? Does the floor represent the back? And you're like, oh, what do I? And you're constantly looking, where am I? Where is my spot? That's where I want to be. Look to somebody beside you and say, you need to check your ticket. Go ahead, tell somebody, you need to check your ticket. You need to check your ticket and make sure you're sitting in the spot that God has reserved for you. God reserved seating for Gideon as a mighty warrior, but Gideon was still sitting in the section called weakness for a while. God called Moses and had a reserved seat for him as a deliverer, but Moses was seated in the section called fear for a while. I can't speak. I can't do that. What chair are you sitting in this morning? Maybe some of you are seated in a section called complacency. And you're complacent, and it's time to get out on the front lines. It's time to do more than be complacent. This is the year to do it. For those of you in our church, this is the time to do it. For those of you that are educators, this is the year to do it. If not now, when are you going to? All you're doing is procrastinating. Now. For those of you that are leaders in our community, if not now, then when? You need to choose your seat. Look to somebody one more time, because they need to hear it. Somebody needs to hear it. Look at them and say, you need to choose your seat. Go ahead, tell them, you need to choose your seat. And maybe some of you are in some of those seats of regret or fear or shame or pain or whatever it may be. And God has saved you a seat, and it's time to check your ticket and say, I'm in the wrong seat. And I need to get up, and I need to get where I need to be so I can be in the reserved place that God has for me. So I'm here this morning for us to remind us that the price of your admission has been paid in full, and you're not in the nosebleed section. You've got sideline passes. God's not paid the price for you to be up in the nosebleed section off in the distance where you can barely see what's going on, and you'd be better off watching it on TV. God's paid the price, and the mission's been paid for you to be front row, sideline, and be involved and be part of it, to embrace the place that God has for you. You're seated with Christ in the heavenly places. Revelation chapter 3, let's move to that verse and I'm done. Verse 21, to the one who is victorious, I will give you the right to what? To sit with me. Where? on my throne. Just as I was victorious and sat down with my Father on his throne. Whoever hears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. You have a seat that's been reserved. The question is, will you respond to it? With every head bowed and every eye closed, I want to pray for you this morning.